You check your phone. 40 more minutes until boarding and you already feel it. A small flare of irritation at having to sit still. Down the terminal, someone else complains about a 3-hour layover. Small stuff. Easy, forgettable frustration. The tapping foot. The fourth scroll through the same 3 apps. The low-grade urge to just be somewhere else already. But the real answer is far stranger than a delayed flight. That itch to just get moving, sitting low in your chest right now, was built into you by people who crossed an entire planet with nothing but their own bodies and a working knowledge of the sky. No roads, no wheels, no engines, no maps, no way to call ahead and see what waited on the other side. No picture of what lay past the next ridge. Just rumor, memory, and whatever the last traveler happened to mention. Somewhere around 70,000 years ago, someone who looked a great deal like you stood at the edge of a valley in East Africa and looked toward a horizon nobody in the family had ever crossed. How do you get from one valley to every continent on Earth except Antarctica, using nothing but your own 2 feet? Start with something you've probably never thought twice about. Your body is strange, not in a bad way, in an athletic way. Strip away the technology and compare yourself to almost any other animal your size, and you're the anomaly. Nearly hairless, dense with sweat glands, a long springy tendon at the back of each ankle, an arch in your foot that stores and releases energy like a coiled spring. Why would a body evolve like that? In 2004, Harvard anthropologist Daniel Lieberman and University of Utah biologist Dennis Bramble published a paper with an answer that surprised a lot of people. They combed through the fossil record of early Homo, comparing dozens of separate anatomical traits, everything from the shape of the skull to the structure of the inner ear, and kept finding the same pattern. Those features, they argued, weren't built for walking at all. They were built for running. Not the short, explosive kind. You're bad at that. Slower than nearly every 4-legged animal on an open plain. Built instead for endurance. For going and going and going in heat that would eventually shut down a faster, furrier animal. That single difference changed what your ancestors were capable of. A cheetah gets one burst of speed and then has to stop. Overheated, lungs burning. You don't. Your body sheds heat by sweating instead of panting, which means you can keep moving long after a faster animal has to quit. Some hunters in the Kalahari still hunt exactly this way today, choosing one antelope, then tracking it for mile after mile across open sand, reading every broken twig and displaced stone, refusing to stop through the hottest part of the day until the animal collapses from heat it simply cannot shed fast enough. What kind of animal chases its dinner for 6 hours on foot, in the sun, on purpose? Yours. Lieberman and Bramble traced this capability back roughly 2 million years, long before fire, long before language, long before anything you'd recognize as culture. Even the ligament running down the back of your neck, holding your head steady while your feet slam against the ground, step after step, shows up first in the fossil record right around the same time running became useful. Your body learned to cover distance before your mind had any concept of a destination. And covering distance is exactly what happened, generation after generation. Nobody's ancestor walked from Africa to Australia in a single lifetime. Nobody packed a bag and made one heroic journey across a continent. It happened the way a stain spreads through fabric. A little further this generation, following a herd, chasing a river, escaping a drought. Across the Ice Age grasslands of Eurasia, that often meant trailing herds of mammoth, bison, and wild horse over a cold, treeless steppe stretching almost without a break from France to Alaska. A little further, the next generation. Do that for a few hundred generations, and a slow, patient drift turns into a species standing on every landmass on the planet. Not by design, just by never quite stopping. Walking alone, though, has limits. What do you do when the ground runs out at the edge of an ocean? Around 20,000 years ago, at the coldest point of the last ice age, so much of the planet's water had frozen into glaciers that sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters. Coastlines you'd recognize from a map today simply didn't exist yet. Where the Bering Strait now separates Siberia from Alaska, with frigid, storm-tossed water, there was dry ground instead. A wide, wind-scoured grassland scientists now call Beringia, stretching for hundreds of miles between two continents that, in your century, are cut apart by ocean. Mammoth, steppe bison, and wild horses grazed across it. So did the people who hunted them, building an entire way of life on a strip of land that, on a map today, simply is not there anymore. Here's where the story gets stranger than most people ever learn in school. Genetic evidence doesn't just show people crossing Beringia, it shows some of them stopping there for thousands of years. Researchers studying the DNA of indigenous peoples across the Americas found a signature that only makes sense if a small population sat still in that harsh refuge for generation after generation, cut off from relatives back in Asia by walls of ice on either side. Scientists call it the Beringian standstill, and it means an entire chapter of human history happened on land that has since vanished completely beneath the sea. What must that have felt like, standing close enough to a new hemisphere to sense it, but blocked by ice with no way through? Eventually, the glaciers pulled back, a corridor opened, and the door swung wide at last. What happened next still stuns researchers. Within a few thousand years, barely a blink by the standards of prehistory, people had spread from the Arctic tundra to the southern tip of South America, on foot, following coastlines, adapting to jungle, desert, mountain, and grassland, all without a single wheel to help carry the load. Now here's the part almost nobody expects. You'd assume water was the very last barrier humans figured out how to cross, that every landmass got settled first, and only much later, with proper ships and instruments, did anyone dare push out into open ocean. It's the opposite. Long before Beringia, long before farming, long before anything resembling a city, people were already sailing. In 2017, a team led by archaeologist Chris Clarkson excavated a rock shelter in northern Australia called Majid Bebe. What they uncovered pushed the date of human arrival in Australia back to roughly 65,000 years ago. Buried in the same layers, the team found ground-edge stone axes and lumps of ochre pigment worn smooth from grinding, tools far more sophisticated than anyone expected from a population that old. And that date creates a genuinely good problem. Even at the lowest point of the Ice Age, even with sea levels at their absolute minimum, the islands between Southeast Asia and Australia never fully connected. Deep channels of open water, some of them dozens of miles across, always remained in the way. So how did anyone get across? They built something that could float. Something sturdy enough to survive real ocean, then pointed it at a horizon with no land visible on the other side, on purpose. Before pottery, before agriculture, before almost every technology you'd normally associate with the word civilization, your ancestors were already ocean voyagers, gambling on a horizon they could not see the other side of. That instinct never really disappeared. It went quiet for a long stretch, and then resurfaced as one of the most precise navigation systems ever developed by anyone, anywhere, instruments or not. Across the Pacific, generations of wayfinders learned to read the ocean itself the way you might read a street sign. The particular angle a swell makes against a hull, the flight paths of birds that always return to land by dusk, the exact point on the horizon where one specific star rises and sets on one specific night of the year. Using nothing else, those wayfinders eventually reached some of the most remote islands on the planet. Hawaii, thousands of miles from the nearest continent, and later Aotearoa, the islands you know today as New Zealand, and Rapa Nui, the single most isolated inhabited island on Earth. Those specks of land rank among the last substantial places anywhere to feel a human footprint, closing a loop that had been open since that first walk out of an African valley tens of thousands of years earlier. For a long time, plenty of outside observers assumed the thousands of tiny islands scattered across the Pacific must have been settled by accident, canoes blown off course, drifting until, by pure luck, they happened to hit land. How do you prove an assumption like that wrong? You sail the ocean yourself without a single modern tool. In 1976, a navigator named Mao Pialug, trained since boyhood in the old ways on the tiny island of Satawal, guided a reconstructed double-hulled canoe called the Hokulea, roughly 2,500 miles from Hawaii to Tahiti. No compass, no sextant, no charts, just the sun, the stars, the moon, and a working feel for the swells moving under the hull, patterns he could reportedly recognize even half asleep. 30 days at sea, across open Pacific water, and he brought that canoe within sight of land almost exactly where he had planned to. That's not luck. Luck does not survive 30 days of open ocean navigation with that kind of precision. It was a complete knowledge system, refined and passed down across dozens of generations, accurate enough to place a wooden canoe on a speck of land in the middle of the largest ocean on the planet. By the 1970s, nobody in Hawaii still held that knowledge firsthand. The chain had nearly broken, which is part of why the voyage mattered so much. Piailug later trained a young Hawaiian sailor named Nainoa Thompson, making sure the knowledge would outlive him this time. Why go to that kind of trouble? Because none of this was ever really about one voyage or even one navigator. It was about information passed hand to hand, mind to mind, across more generations than anyone could ever name, each one adding its own small stretch of distance to the story, the same way your own ancestors once did, walking a little further every time, following a herd, a river, or a hunch. So the next time you check your phone and sigh at 40 more minutes until boarding, remember what that feeling actually is. It is not impatience, it is inheritance. The same restlessness that pulled a body built for running out of a valley in East Africa, across a grassy bridge that no longer exists, onto a raft aimed at a horizon with nothing visible beyond it. Every mile of this planet that now has a person standing on it got that way because someone, somewhere, decided the horizon was worth the risk. You never inherited the roads, the wheels, or the maps. You inherited the itch to go anyway.